So today I'm sitting down and taking the time to explore a little bit more in depth the Mercury and Mars retrogression. So this is something that I'm just sharing my contemplations with you. It's by no means complete, and you are more than welcome to add and share and tell me if you resonate or not. So I will fill you with some dates in order to understand Mars retrograde a little bit better, and then I will go more into the symbology and also the name for this conversation, or for the theme that I'm talking about, is turning towards your pain. So you will see that probably will make more sense while I'm going to explore it. And for me as a man, this is particularly interesting. And so I'm saying that because it has a very masculine touch, and that's very likely because I am a man. But there is by no means this is just a talk for men, and it's simply speaking about our masculinity, which I think is not gender specific, but simply an energy that is alive for all of us. So I just have to express that. I'm not looking towards gender. I actually feel that we can be very flexible and things can shift within ourselves constantly, and that then also means energy is alive and energies are constantly moving, which then is exactly the language of astrology, which is trying to constantly explain what is currently alive, which doesn't mean that something is the ultimate or there is something that is true. So having said that, we could say that Mars takes 687 days to do one circle to come back to where it started. So we could say every roughly 2 years we have a Mars retrograde, which will then take around 2 months. And then we have Mercury, who takes around 88 days to take a one return to come back to its original point. And that then brings us to about 3 Mercury retrogrades a year. So it's not unlikely that because a Mars retrograde takes 2 months and a Mercury retrograde takes 3 times a year, that these two fall together. It doesn't have to happen every time, but for example, 2 years ago when we had the last Mars retrograde in July 2018, it was the same case. And interesting, what this brings up is a deep cleansing or a detox. And I will go further into explanation. But since we are speaking also about this happening right now, I just want to remind you about the dates that we are having the Mars retrograde and the Mercury retrograde right now in 2020. So Mercury has been going retrograde since the 13th of October and will stay in retrograde until November the 4th. Mercury has been going retrograde in Scorpio and then will go backwards into Libra and then go direct again. So we will explore that theme from Scorpio and Libra. And then the Mars retrograde. So the Mars retrograde has been starting on the 18th of September in 28 degrees in Aries. So Mars stationed retrograde on the 10th of September in 28 degrees in Aries and is staying retrograde until the 14th of November. So on the 14th of November, it will station direct again. And it will actually station direct in Aries. So the whole retrograde period, the entire 2 months roughly, it will be in one sign. So there's a lot of Aries themes there. And Aries is also the home of Mars. So we have a Mars or a masculine energy that is very at home. So Mars normally is bringing up our instinctive side, our gut feeling, and therefore it's also connected with our primordial nature. We're simply getting after what we want, and that just means we are not thinking about it, we're just simply doing. So it's a very active behavior. So imagine when we're going retrograde that this is not working anymore. It's not that we are just pushing and getting what we want, or we are applying some force or even violence in order to push through of where we need to go. And that simply means when we are having a Mars in retrograde, this is a very uncomfortable time. It's perhaps a time where there is frustration and patience coming up, simply because the natural way of getting what we want and getting about of how we used to do things is not working. We could even say it's a time where pushing, which is more the physical, forceful way, or then having tears of being the victim and poor me, getting and blaming somebody else, or even emotionally manipulating somebody, that is not working. And that can be a big frustration, because then the question is, well, then how do we get things? So in general, when we're having Mars retrograde, is a time of adjustment. It's a time of learning patience, that we actually cannot hold on to our usual way, but that we have to relax. And especially when we are in reactivity, when we have heightened adrenaline, or when we are not getting what we want, it's really hard to not just jump and get what we want, or have the usual reactions. And that's exactly what Mars retrograde is doing. It shows us a different way. It tells us to find courage and to get in touch with what our needs really are. So a lot of times we think we know what we want, but especially in Mars retrograde season, it's imagine like a phase where we are not getting our way, and that means we have to actually contemplate or actually look within of if this is really worth the effort. Because do we really want that? And a lot of time that means actually some sort of pain, some sort of frustration, some sort of vulnerability. And the beautiful thing is that that very pain is actually showing us if that is really worth it, if that's really what we want, if that's really something that we need to clarify our boundaries. And that gives us therefore then the capacity to readjust or recalibrate. What are we getting just because we could get it, because we could apply force, versus what do we really want because it really matters for us, because there is some sort or sense of need or sensitivity that we are getting in touch with. So especially when we have Mars in Aries, and then we could say in a general way, it's like I just go and get what I want and jumping into the next adventure, and it's a very active, a very dynamic home. But right now, when we are in a Mars retrograde phase, then it's not about getting it or having it our way. But that doesn't mean then that we just can lie back and do nothing. Well, that's not how it works. It's very much about showing up, but then really showing courage, and showing courage in the sense of really feeling in the situation, is it really worth to actually fight? Or is it maybe better to just be calm and contemplate and questioning our normal reaction? And where do we really have to push? Where is it really so important where we feel this is going over our boundaries, or we being not recognized, and actually seeing a step deeper of what really matters for us? And therefore, the showing up is much more on a sense where we can recognize maybe deeper parts in us, and that then comes to that vulnerability or that theme of turning towards our pain. And it's not just pain, it can be anxiety, it can be doubt, and that can be even self-doubt, that we're feeling lost, that we're feeling lonely, that there is some sort of stress or fear, and it can be in all sorts of that dimension that we are actually realizing what is going on within ourselves. And then the most important part then, especially if you are a very mental personality, then is that we are trying to fix it, we are trying to understand it, we're trying to rationalize it, we're trying to get somewhere, we're trying to put it in a box and say, okay, I'm done with that discomfort, I'm done with that anxiety, I'm done with that fear, like just save me. And actually in this moment that we are right now, and in general when we have a Mars retrograde, it's that moment that we have to show up, that we have to actually admit that we are a vulnerable human being with wounds, with a pain that bothers us. Because if we can admit that there is something that really triggers us, that really makes us feel so uncomfortable, then this is the very birthplace of where we can feel into our human nature, and from that allowing to feel that and not trying to get rid of it, and allowing that part within us to be alive. This is the very birthplace of where joy, connection, brotherhood, sisterhood, belonging, creativity, innovation, and so forth are actually at home. And that's almost then the owning of that part of where we don't have to be perfect. We don't have to push our way. We don't have to enforce our vulnerability upon somebody else. Just that we don't have to feel it, and we can actually get to a place where we really can understand other people as well, but still understand what we need and set our boundaries and actually find a middle way and become even clearer of what that means for us. So it's a beautiful moment of Mars retrograde to become even more in touch with ourselves. And especially now that we have Mars retrograde, between the 13th and the 20th of October, we are really in the midst of it. We're reaching the climax of feeling that Mars in retrograde, and that can bring up a lot. Like, it depends on the person, on your personal birth chart, in your situation in life. And it's a time where we have to shift from the mind towards our guts. And that means also to relax into the pain, to turn towards the pain. And then we could say we can do a lot of work, which I will bring up a little bit later when I share with you a little bit a deeper story. So that's for the Mars. Now for Mercury retrograde, Mercury relates to the mind, to the capacity of sharing, of verbalizing, of communicating. When we have that capacity internalized, then we feel naturally a little bit less social. It's normally a time where we feel more compelled to understand ourselves better, so do some self-work and actually look within. We feel a little bit less social, we feel a little bit less to speak with different people, simply because we want to actually do an inner cleanse. And when we have this capacity of the mind being turned within, especially now that we have Mercury being in Scorpio, is this capacity to really go on a deeper level, on an emotional depth, where we can actually come to a place where we can find out what is triggering us, what is actually there on a deeper emotional level that is pushing us, that makes us feeling uncomfortable. And we could also say uncomfortable, like normally a desire pushes us to detach or to move away from something or to get something. So it's normally pushing away or getting something because there is an emotion alive in us. And actually coming to that place where we see how we have a repulsion or an attraction, it brings us to a place where we can see what is the underlying motivation, what is the underlying behavior, what is the underlying emotion that makes us react like that. And then the whole cleansing on the detox is actually that we realize that we normally don't have to push or attract or to get in our lives, that we come to a place where we can see the dynamic on a mental, emotional, or even physical level, and we can see how that is playing out. And maybe we don't have to do that actually. We don't have to repeat that cycle. We can actually relax into. So it's almost like somebody speaks with you and it brings a theme up that you are feeling, triggered. Let's say your anger, your jealousy or whatever. Or let's say your fear, your emotions are coming up. Then rather than reacting and you getting stiff and you're heightened of adrenaline, or you're feeling lost, numb, we are actually relaxing into that. And that's where actually the whole consciousness work comes in, like that being connected with your breath, to actually contemplate in the sense of meditation, where we are staying in the awareness while we are realizing that there are constantly thoughts, emotions and sensations, visuals alive, but that we are not just these sensations that are happening with us, but that we actually this capacity that can watch anything. And that's exactly where the detox is actually happening right now in this Mars and Mercury retrograde, where we have all these things being shown so clearly, and it's an invitation for us to deeply detox and to cleanse, where we don't have to react, where we actually can relax into and find almost a deeper place of relaxation, where we can find a place where life moves us and not we are being moved by our anger, by our fear, by our worries. And that doesn't mean we have to kind of step behind or beyond that. but it is a natural process of actually, because the pain is so strong, that we have to respect that, and we have to turn towards our pain, and we have to feel it. So then Mercury retrograde leads us to a place where we actually come into the Scorpio, to an understanding of this underlying depth, or emotions or sensations or feelings. And from there we actually come back, and remember it's going direct in Libra, where we then have the capacity to maybe share that with our partner, to share that with our family or community member. We share that with our parents, we share that with our co-worker that we had a fight, or with our boss that we got triggered. And bringing that capacity in of being vulnerable, of saying, look, I'm not pushing myself into my salary raise, or having a new home, or traveling somewhere else, or getting rid of my children, or my relationship, or whatever it is that was the initial trigger. And the trigger is definitely there, but it's not the person that triggered you, it's you that actually have the explosion inside of you. So we all need somebody that triggers us, and then we become aware of what's the explosive within us. And having the capacity, of course we would like to blame the person that triggers us, because it's just, I don't have to do the self-work, but then maybe that allowance during the Mars and Mercury retrograde is actually understanding what is actually alive in us, then brings us to the capacity of turning towards our pain and becoming real, becoming a human being that actually has hurt or pain and an emotion that needs to be respected, that you cannot transcend away, that you cannot love talk, that you cannot be compassionate towards others, or that you're just harmony hungry or pleasing in order to get what you want. But you actually have to admit to yourself, in order for your own soul growth, in order for your own authenticity, in order for your own clarity in life, that you need just that. That's where you're at right now. And only from recognizing and honoring this boundary right here, right now, things can change. So you cannot fast step or overstep that by trying to say how the future would be. But you actually have to come back to a very primordial and intimate place, where you are very naked, very real, and very vulnerable. And from there you actually don't know what's happening next. And it also doesn't matter, because we only at the place where we can hopefully simply become aware of what is alive within us, and then communicate that. And if somebody then sees us in such a calm, like that's when all the work has been happening, we have confronted all the fears, all the trying to fix it, to apply all our methods, to come to a place of yes or no, to try to solve it. And when we finally give up, and when we finally have to admit, it feels like that. And this is what is alive in me. And I just want to share that with you and see where we can go from there together. That you can create a new reality together. And I think the beauty of that is, because you have accepted it yourself, now you can share it with somebody else. If you're not willing to step into that fear, normally what we are doing is that we are blaming somebody else, or we already know how the other person would react, or we even too afraid even that we could say that, because we worry that the reaction so much that it's not even worth it, and we blame the other person, the surrounding, the place, the situation, life, for the way it is. And then we have to be the hero of that journey then, and run away in solitude and go our own journey. And that's the big fear, where we are ending up in destruction, and we have to leave everything behind us. And I speak now from a very masculine point of, like, let's say in divorce, where we're not finding the capacity to become vulnerable and sensitive and soft, to find actually that very feminine place. And that feminine place is exactly then invited in us when Mars is going retrograde. And retrograde means you cannot apply your physical strength, but you have to come to other ways that work within you. And that is a very vulnerable, sensitive, empathic, and gentle way. And that's simply the other spectrum of what we have. And there's like masculine and feminine, and there's many ways in between. But it's that dance to move in between. And I think that what is so beautiful in any relationship. And it also has to do within ourselves. Can we move in between these two polarities within ourselves? And that's why this Mars retrograde can be so challenging. But with this Mercury retrograde, it's a beautiful invitation to go deeper. And that's exactly then the domain where there is more work to do. When we are in touch with that what is alive with us, then the real jewels are actually coming towards us, and then we can actually work on our shame, on our pain, on our sexuality. We can work on our empathy. We can work on our capacity to be in touch with emotion, then also communicate that in a non-violent way. We can start to work with our anger and distinguish between the anger and aggression, because there is a healthy anger, or even a loving anger. We can move more from the intellect or from the mind towards the heart, and we can go into addictions and where we are numbing or trying to use spirituality to transcend our personality in order to not feel our wound. And that's when it becomes really juicy, and you're more than welcome if you want to reach out, if you are interested to work with me personally. And if not, then I just simply hope that this conversation that I have been sharing with you and myself has been helpful, because that's a really important journey that we are all going through together, and nobody is done with that or is mastering that. But that's exactly where I think we need all brotherhood. We need people that we can share on a very deep and intimate level, that we can feel understood and not alone in that journey. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you for sharing your comments on your thoughts on that one. Much love to you. Goodbye.